All right.
Very glary.
So I think we're all here and ready to go. Thank you all for your time and your attention, and what I hope will be a pretty dynamic, interactive, slightly controversial, maybe very controversial panel. I'm Joseph. I run a seed-stage health tech venture capital fund that invests globally in technologies that basically try to bring precision medicine to everyone. This is why I guess I'm moderating this, and I'm very honored to do so. We're all very lucky to be joined by some industry titans across both entrepreneurs and investors. However, before I go ahead and allow them to introduce themselves, I want to do two things. First, I'd like to understand you better. So I'm very curious in the room, who here is actually in healthcare? Just raise of hands. Wow, that's a lot more than I was expecting. That's fantastic. How about people who are in government or academia? Okay. Financial services like investing, banking?
Most.
Most. And multinationals, other industries, service providers? Okay, cool. So as a consequence, I do want to kind of make sure we're all on the same footing. So I've prepared a couple of slides, which I hope will come up in a moment, and we can talk about this. So when you see this slide, you'll immediately see two things jump out at you. Number one, I'm pretty bad at art, but I might be okay at Lego. The second thing is that medicine really hasn't changed too much since medieval times. The basic flow is something happens to you. You know, you get a runny nose, you cough, maybe a sword through the chest, and then you go to see somebody who knows or pretends to know more about what's affecting you than you do. There's some poking and prodding that ensues, and then you're treated. You know, be it, a pill, a shot, maybe some leeches and some bloodletting, and then off you go, and if you're lucky, you'll get to come back another day. And this has worked pretty well for us for a long, long time, when most of the things that affected us were acute in nature. So this is things like illnesses, trauma, accidents. But this has changed. In Asia-Pacific alone, over 70% of the disease burden is now non-communicable chronic diseases like heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, and so on and so forth. And because we've gotten pretty good at treating these acute things that maybe knock us out a bit earlier than we should have been, we're getting a lot older. And then these silent, non-communicable diseases tend to add up and compound in unique and interesting ways. And so this idea of one-size-fits-all medicine doesn't really work. And even in the delivery models, the fact that you have to go to a place to see a specialist or a doctor, and you've got a lot more of you that are going to this place, that starts to create a bit of a queue. It creates congestion. And to be honest, if you've got a disease that's going to kill you for 20 years very slowly and silently until it's not so silent and not so slow anymore, that's just not going to cut it anymore. So we need to do something differently. So the idea of personalized medicine is really that. You want to put the patient at the center. And why is that so hard? Oh, sorry, I made a mistake. You don't want the patient at the center. You want the person at the center because you don't want them to become a patient to begin with. You want to be able to do things and intervene before that's an issue. And the question is, well, personalized medicine, that sounds a bit of a gulf away from what we're just describing, because I'm guessing most of you think that personalized medicine is, choosing the right treatments based on what your lab results or your genes, or if you're really modern and maybe good friends with Dr. Jeremy Lim, what's going on in your gut in terms of your bacteria and your microbiome. But are you really just the product of the genes and the bugs that live inside of you? So I want to propose that there is a broader definition of personalized medicine that includes, your activity. Yeah, here we go. Your activity, your exercise, your physiological responses to the world around you, what you eat, your hobbies, how you work, what you do for work, and where you work. And maybe now it makes sense that we have the panel assembled today that we do, because I don't see any really hardcore traditional life sciences people, some that used to wear this hat some time ago. So I'll turn it over back to them to introduce themselves And I'll start with Azuma-san.
Okay, can you slide?
Yeah, oh, you can sit. It's up to you. I think we can sit. I just like to stand.
Hi, my name is Shiho. I am a CEO and co-founder of leading MedTech. We're developing medical imaging system for breast cancer. Let me introduce our business quickly. Our system is shaped as a bed with a hole in the middle, and the ring alley scanner is mounted inside the hole. And the woman laid face down on the bed, putting one of her breast into it. Ring alleys can target using ultrasound technology, moving up and down, and then it can get a whole breast automatically, and it can be diagnosed with AI diagnostic support. I used to be a researcher in aerospace engineering, different area from medical area. But I had my own experience. I lost my mother to cancer when I was a high school student. Our present CTO is my husband, and he used to be a professor in medical engineering, and he invited me to launch this business again and again and again. So I remembered my painful experience. So I decided to, launch our business. That's why I am here.
Fantastic. Okay. We'll just go down. David?
Perfect. Good afternoon. I'm David Berry. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Just as a background, trained as an MD PhD, but became an entrepreneur. And I focused on medical innovations and entrepreneuring for the simple reason that when I went through my medical training, one of the things that I recognized is that the ability to think outside of the dogma of the field, the ability of the field to innovate with less than a 17 or so year half-life was completely absent. And that your seniority or your credibility was defined by the length of time that you practiced, not the quality of data or the quality of science that you brought to bear. And that to me said, well, if you want to make a difference, you have to invent the future that you want to have. So I set out to start a series of companies. I've been both a serial entrepreneur as well as an investor for the past decade and a half. Started about 30 companies, mostly focused on therapeutics. Have recently launched a company called Integral Health, where I'm the CEO. And am broadly of the view that we are now at a point that healthcare therapeutics are ripe for disruption. And what we can do is use modern computational tools to fundamentally disrupt the entirety of this field, from therapeutics to how we define disease to how a patient engages with the system.
That's fantastic. Okay, Kuldeep. Oh, sorry, we're in different order here. Okay, Edwin, sorry.
Edwin Morris, CFO of Ping An Healthcare and Technology Company. We're better known as Ping An Good Doctor. We're a company based out of Shanghai. What we do, in a nutshell, is that we are disrupting. We like to see ourselves as revolutionizing the way that healthcare is being delivered in China, in particular family medicine. We provide family medicine service, or your GP, general practitioner service, on our mobile app. Not only do we solve the accessibility issue, which is providing quality access to the population 24/7, but more importantly, we solve the cost issue. Healthcare worldwide, China inclusive, is very, very expensive. Through the use of technology, our own proprietary AI, and our own in-house medical team, we're able to significantly reduce the cost per consultation on our platform. And this is making a huge impact, so much so as impacting government policy on the delivery of internet healthcare in China, and we're beginning to see that across other parts of the world. About my own background, I'm obviously not trained in the medical field. I have to say, well, my mum trained as a doctor in China a long, long time ago, and my aunt was also trained as a doctor in Ireland. That was also a long, long time ago. But otherwise, my interaction with doctor before joining Ping An Good Doctor was actually visiting one. I've worked, before Ping An Good Doctor, I worked with, some of you may have heard, the Swire Group in Hong Kong for over 10 years, obviously coming up from the finance background.
Okay. Thanks. Kuldeep?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Kuldeep, founder CEO of Bioformis. Spent almost 10 years in the intersection of engineering and medical. In 2015, I started Bioformis. And Bioformis started with a dream, and the dream was, can we predict disease before it happens so that we can improve health and outcomes? Every one of us knows a loved one, directly, indirectly, who has suffered from a complex chronic condition. Would it be beneficial if we could have predicted that earlier? And that's what has really driven us for all these years. So what we essentially do at Bioformis is, how do you combine a known pharmacotherapy with clinical benefit and combine that with a digital solution so that it can synergetically act together to drive meaningful outcomes in patients? So let me ask everyone a question. How many of you know what a digital therapeutics is? Very little. How many of you have a health or a wellness app on their smartphones? Okay. And how many of you have those apps which are FDA cleared? Just one. So, a digital therapeutics essentially is a software which is used to treat and manage a disease. I would say 50 years ago, you had cells, molecules, biologics, and now we have moved to gene therapy, and soon there's a whole new era of how do you use software to treat and manage disease. And that's exactly what we do, either monotherapy or a combination therapy. So we have been in business for almost 4 years, backed by some institutional investors, including Sequoia, MassMutual, EDBI, Aviva, et cetera.
So is this for your Series C that you're describing this, or?
No, just
okay. Awesome.
Brief intro.
Thank you. Helmut?
Well, also very pleased to be here today. My name is Helmut Schüssler. I'm the CEO of a company called TVM Capital Healthcare Partners. My past has been mostly in investing and building of new businesses, a little bit like David. I started my career as a life science venture capitalist and have done probably 30, 35 investments myself and overseen about 150 or so in the space, mostly therapeutic development, some devices, some diagnostics. But in the last 10 years with TVM Capital Healthcare, I focused more on the service provision side. So TVM Capital Healthcare invests in mostly single specialty clinics that address some very particular health issues. And when we look at the world of precision medicine, it's fair to say that for us, it's not really a genetic problem or a therapeutic problem. It is a much wider range of topics that we have to cover. And for example, what Bioformis is doing has a tremendous impact also. So if you think about precision medicine or personalized medicine, I think the ultimate objective of it is something I would call healthy longevity. Because that's what we're all after in this industry, right? Stay healthy longer. If we have longer lives, stay healthy longer. And there is now a multitude of tools that are made available by technology companies, by academicians and researchers. And how we combine these tools to create that healthy longevity that we're all seeking is going to be a really interesting societal problem. Not a scientific problem. That exists too. But I think that a lot of issues will come up in that conversation that we need to deal with in a very broad conversation in society. Something like, do we take responsibility for our own health? And where does this responsibility end with all the data we have and all the transparency that will be created? So I hope we have a chance to talk about those types of issues.
I think we certainly will, and I think of all places, this is a great place to actually start that conversation, given the diversity of people we do have in the room, as well as the ones we have on stage. So I have maybe a first question to break the ice a little bit. Why are we having this conversation today? I mean, you did mention there's a plethora of tools available, technologies, but they're not new. Telemedicine has been around since the 70s. I was kind of musing that I had this analog pedometer from the 1950s that was made in Japan. It worked almost as well as a Fitbit, just no Bluetooth connection. But the internet's been around for a long time. We've had mobile smartphones for a long time. Why is it today that we're starting this conversation? And I'll leave it open to whoever wants to take a first crack.
Well, part of the problem, I think, with precision medicine is that we're doing two things at the same time. One is we live in a world of historical dogma, meaning when you look at how diseases got defined, they were defined by some researcher who described some phenotype 150 years ago in some cases, 3,000 years ago in the case of something like cancer. And what we have now is a couple of streetlights, if you'll allow me to use the metaphor, and we're looking under them. And what we're hoping is that if we keep on looking under the same streetlights, we can start to understand these diseases better that have proven intractable for quite some time. And yes, we've made some progress, but what we're hoping is that with eras like, with innovations like digital and things along those lines, we can start making a difference. What we've ignored is that the opportunity here is there's way more data than we actually appreciate. And what we believe fundamentally, we at Integral, is that we can use the sorts of data that isn't actually appreciated to be data, actually integrate it effectively, better define what disease actually is, actually entirely redefine disease, so that we don't have to go to places and say cancer is a heterogeneous disease, which we know because it was first described 3,200 years ago by Hippocrates, who described it as cancer because it looks like a crab. And it's not a surprise that everything that has an atypical growth of cells is not the same thing. But we need to understand that. And we're just getting to that forefront where the data is available, and it becomes this question of, can we actually start using this data, redefine what these diseases are, and transform the way that we develop therapeutics so that we can affect patients better? Because I don't think we want to be in an era where we're looking at 15 years and $3.5 billion per drug. We need to be in a place where we can do it in 7 years and $200 million, and do that systematically so that we can make a difference, reduce cost, and change the life cycle of medicine. Precision medicine, precision health is a very important piece of it. But I think we have to change our own dogma in this, and it's right now that it's the right time to have that conversation to induce that change.
Your thoughts?
I think a different perspective here. There are two things within healthcare which are very critical. One is clinical evidence, which takes time. You start all the way, from a simple retrospective or a clinical trial all the way until randomized clinical trial. And then there is, of course, regulatory agencies which have to approve, and you have to get their buy-in. And just this year, FDA released their draft guidelines on how they would leverage artificial intelligence to essentially approve devices which are tailoring on a personalized level. The FDA essentially is putting efforts essentially this year on bringing new guidelines. And just as an example, take one basic example in healthcare, clinical trials. Pharmaceutical industry spends 7-8 years to get a drug out in the market, and they follow their traditional method of long clinical trials. And can digital technologies or mobile health technologies which already exist be used to speed up drug approvals? So essentially, this year, again, there was new draft guidelines which was released by the FDA, which essentially said that pharma companies don't need to leverage on traditional hospitalization mortality to run clinical trials as endpoints which take a long time, but they can leverage on patient-centric outcomes like quality of life, functional capacity, and use digital technologies to quantify that and measure that. And that significantly changes the dynamics of approving drugs, which take 7-8 years to maybe 2 to 3 years. So I think this is the right time, because within healthcare, various stakeholders have to come together, and I think we are at the right time.
So I've heard two points of view here. One, both around the disease and the treatment of said disease. I noticed something in the title that says personalizing medicine for all. And I know medicine is kind of the thing that shifts people towards actually the idea of treating. So if we're going to bring it to all, that sounds kind of expensive, even if you're trying to cut costs in clinical trials and all that sorts of things. And maybe I want to shift the question over to Edwin to maybe kick us all off, because the experience of China and Ping An has been quite interesting. I'm not sure you're aware, but they have something like 60+ million monthly active users. And I'd love to learn, what's your take on it? Because for all is something that really should mean for all.
Yeah.
Where do we start?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think this is exactly the question that when we were doing our listing on the Hong Kong main board last year and trying to talk to investors as part of our IPO funding, a lot of investors were very skeptical. However, they have started to come round. And I think they're starting to actually see the vision that what we have been building over the past 5 years. If I just define very, very quickly, what is the situation in the China market, and I'm sure a lot of you can say, oh, it happens at where I live as well, and then the proposition that we're bringing. In China, funnily enough, there's no such thing as GPs, right? Family medicine. This whole area just doesn't exist. If you're sick, you go to a hospital. But hospitals were never built to do outpatients, right? They were built to do surgeries, etc. So it's getting very, very expensive, right, to basically serve the over 8 billion outpatient visits in China that takes place every year. This 8 billion volume all go to hospitals. And who's paying for it? The government is paying for it. And it's becoming economically unsustainable, and the government knows it. Right? Also, quality healthcare is very, very inaccessible because it's very, very scarce resources. So most of the population, they go to hospitals, get a very, very bad experience. Misdiagnosis rate is over 30%, and yet the government is paying for all this. There needs to be a solution. This is our view. We're doing this by providing GP service on our mobile app 24/7, and we're able to cut costs down. Our cost per consultation is actually single-digit renminbi. Single-digit renminbi is our cost per consultation. So much so that we're able to attend to over 600,000 consultations a day during the first half of this year. How do we do it? We have our own in-house medical team and our own proprietary AI. Right. The combination of this is able to drive costs down because the volume of consultation cases that is being processed by this combined unit is a lot higher. It's about 60 times that of a typical offline hospital in China. Now, what does that mean in terms of providing personalized medicine for all? It actually means that instead of the patient, visiting the doctor, like the traditional offline sense, we're actually bringing the family doctor to the patient, to the user, via technology. We do that, obviously, through the mobile app. And as we build a database on you, as we build effectively your electronic health file, your health record, we know more and more about your condition. Working together with our own in-house team and our AI, which has accumulated over 500 million consultation cases already, we're able to very quickly, efficiently, and accurately diagnose your problems and provide you with real-time professional advice. This is the core value. Quality medical advice at a fraction of the cost. Right. When we talk about the future, this is what we're seeing happening today. And this is exactly why investors this time last year were a bit skeptical, but now they're all starting to believe in the vision that we have. Which is to say that as recent as the end of last month, June 30th, the Chinese government actually made pronouncements, very detailed principles, very detailed framework about having the delivery of internet healthcare included in their social health insurance. Right? That is a massive, massive endorsement by the government on the efficacy of delivering healthcare through the internet. And this is, again, this is something that we found very, very exciting. And as I said before, we believe that we're disrupting, if not revolutionizing, the way that healthcare is delivered, which is bringing the family, your own personal doctor, to you as and when you need it through a combination of technology and also working with the government on the provision of healthcare for all, effectively.
That's great. So I saw a look of a variety of facial expressions in the audience, some kind of in wonder, some with a bit of skepticism, some playing with their phones. I'm curious, amongst the panel, what are your reactions to this? Helmut, I know this is something that you...
Yeah, I think that primary care networks actually don't exist in most countries, especially in the emerging economies and developing economies, because healthcare is historically performed in hospitals, very much like it is in China. But if you go into other countries, small and big, it's always the same thing. And I believe that early triage, access to quality information, is probably not exactly precision medicine, as it were. It's just access to somebody to talk to tell you what it is that you're dealing with, and then take decisions from there. But it also shows that there is a confluence of things happening. There is the tools, as I said before, are now emerging extremely rapidly. And there are so many things that we can dream up just by applying stuff that's already out there and being used in other industries very actively. And I think, as you said, it is all the precision element comes in when you build your database on your clients, your patients. And the next time that person phones in and says, I have a splitting headache, you look at your database and your AI system may tell you what that is likely to be and what that person has to do as a next step. I think it is that confluence of access to information, good and data-based and experience-based decision-making, and then action. And this is where the therapeutics come in, and the genetics and the molecular level, and this is where the word precision medicines originally came from. Smaller and smaller patient cohorts for which individual drugs are being made. And I think this, in the end of the day, will maybe one day lead us into what I call mass customization, where drugs are made specifically for individuals. Now, very often that would be a gene therapy, for example, or a T-cell therapy, and not a pill, okay, because that's not very practical. But there has never been a time like this where all these tools are emerging, becoming available at the same time, and literally thousands of companies are trying out different ways of engaging with the patient.
Yeah.
I think it's a hugely exciting time.
Yeah. I think it's a good point. I mean, obviously I'll leave some time for the other speakers, but I think Helmut made a great point, is that we like to think that there is now a superhighway, so to speak, where there is the bridge between the care provider and the patient through the internet, through technology, right? And every other piece of technology, whether you come from the pharmaceutical angle or whether you come from the chronic disease management level, can feed into that, through that superhighway, directly to the patient.
But I think there's other components on top of this, which I fully agree with where you're going. But when you look at even the cost of therapeutics, what it's causing right now is only about 7% of the world to be able to have access to a given therapeutic that's being developed right now. So the cost of therapeutics has to come down drastically for us to be able to get into a world where we're talking about for all. And then the second piece that goes on top of that is we have to be able to deliver the right drug to the right patient at the right time. About 30 to 35% of healthcare costs are incurred because the wrong drug is given to the if you will, the patient up front. And the morbidity that's associated with that, then the cycling to find the right drug over time leads to a progressive failing in the healthcare system. And if we can start doing better matching earlier, we can massively reduce costs.
Actually, when you look at the reality of healthcare today, so you go to your doctor, you have a splitting headache, and he says, well, I think it's a migraine, and take this. And if it doesn't work, come back. So that's diagnostics by therapy. It's actually a very interesting approach, and it has worked the last 50 years. So you take it, doesn't work, you go back. You get something else, you go back. So you take it, doesn't work, you come back. I think that is a vicious cycle because it creates tremendous cost in the system. And we have to break through this. So this is why what you do is so immensely important, and what you do is so immensely important, because we need to establish much earlier what we're really dealing with. So the diagnostic base has to be stronger. We not only have to collect the data on each of us and our individual biology and issues, but we also have to use them and make decisions based on those data. And once we get there, and we all have our own patient record, which we own, hopefully, and which we hopefully decide what to do with, and make that available to our next doctor, I think we are entering a phase where we can probably cut out 20, 30, 40% of the cost of healthcare just because of efficiencies created by these technologies.
That's a great point. You bring up two things I want to explore. Number one is, how do you know when is enough? how much data do you actually need? How much of it is actually useful? There's a combinatorial explosion of possibilities. How do you know that the right amount of data has been applied in the right circumstance? But I'll pause that, because the first one, I noticed Azuma-san's been very quiet today, and you brought up the point of patient data, which hopefully we'll own, and hopefully get to choose what we do with. It does seem that we have two worlds emerging here. We have the, let's put all the data in one place, let's act on it, let's learn from it, let's not really care about the rights of the individual data, versus, no, what's mine is mine, and you can't use it. Or if you do want to use it, pay me lots of money to use it. So it seems like we have a bit of a divide in terms of data privacy and data policies. And I was wondering, what's your thought? And if one side of, let's call a spade a spade. If the West chooses to be very private with its data, are we at a disadvantage? Are we going to lose?
Can I say my opinion about
Sure.
personalizing medicine for all first?
Sure.
The innovation is already coming in the area of blood test and gene test, because those tests monitor and investigate the original information of disease. So I think those tests will be a key someday in the future. And those tests can suggest the best medicine each to its patient, especially after patient is diagnosed. So there was the innovation of gene test and blood test is good. Good word, I think.
Or any other thoughts about the dichotomy of data? Are we setting us up for disadvantage? What's the right way? What's the right approach?
Well,
It's a tough one.
I just recalled that I think it was this time last year that the Australian government actually asked everyone to, by default, your whole health record will be made available, I think, to all hospitals unless you specifically opt out. And you have to actually go to the website to opt out. So I think some country, this is my understanding, because I got the notice from Medicare as well. So I think Western countries may be gradually recognizing the value of having your own personal health record being shared amongst hospitals, so that anything happens to you anywhere across the country, the institution, the medical institution at the location will have access to some information.
Well, I think there's two pieces to what you were getting at, obviously, because you said dichotomy. But part of this is that in order to actually come up with the information and the answers that you actually need, you have to ask the right question, and you have to have the right data. So I think that one of the big problems that we've had is there's this assumption that all data is created equally and all data is equally valuable. And I think right now, most of the emphasis is being put on the wrong data. But if you define the problem set right, you can actually use very small amounts of very high quality data. And this is one of the best parts of artificial intelligence when used right. What artificial intelligence allows you to do is take highly multivariate analyses and come up with very straightforward conclusions that override the way that people who like to think in low-dimensional space can normally think. So as long as you can figure out the right data, you can solve these problems very efficiently and very quickly. Now, I think the privacy issue is twisted once we realize that there's actually answers to be had. Yeah. Because if I felt that I could get an answer by exposing my data, I would do it in a heartbeat. I think right now, people are more concerned that they get cut off from their insurance. We haven't crossed that gap, and I think we need to start solving real problems with computational tools and techniques, which is right in the near-term forefront. And then I think that whole equation changes.
I think it is mostly the insurance problem. Because in a discussion I said yesterday, if I was seriously sick, and if I thought making my data available to researchers to find something that helps me, I'd probably be running to somebody and give that data away. On the other hand, I think the key issue with it, though, is the concept that we've developed through social insurance in the West, particularly, of solidarity. I personally believe that solidarity goes out the window very fast when you know that this guy has a 60% chance of developing cancer before he gets 60. And this guy may be an Alzheimer patient in 20 years from now, and you're healthy. And there is no such prediction for you yourself. So are you still going to agree with that concept of solidarity, which is actually at the roots of health insurance as we know it?
I think it's multiple things, right? So as David mentioned, first of all, based on the data, it's critical. People say that I have huge amount of data, right? What does that mean? That means like nothing. So if you don't define an exact problem statement and try to solve for that, what data you have is worthless. Just as an example, you're trying to build a model to, let's say, predict a disease or predict, let's say, heart failure exacerbation. You know what kind of data you need, and it might not be your electronic health record data, but it might be you need longitudinal data of patient from the time of diagnosis all the way until stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and that's the kind of data you need to do accurate prediction. So I think that's where, as you asked, how much data and what kind of data is required, that's very critical. The second thing, of course, on the insurance, I think, of course, insurance, there is a concern there, but the access to the data and limiting access of that data to the insurance can add and can solve a different problem, because right now, within the insurance industry, there is no transparency in the ecosystem, right? You know, right now, nobody knows. Payers don't know. They are reimbursing medication and drugs depending on just one clinical trial, one randomized clinical trial. But what about real-world data? Is the drug working? Is it really driving outcomes? Is it really reducing cost? And having access to that curated data to the payers might be valuable. Of course, personal data, maybe not, but really having access to the right amount of information to the payers might be, you know, a good advantage.
It's kind of a conundrum, because you're trying to really, you know, as an insurer, you want to make sure that the spread between premium and claim payout is as much in your favor as possible without seeming egregious. So to an extent, you do need to tailor the insurance to the patient. And the question I have is, how do you actually build that trust? I mean, in the case of Ping On, everything is there. In the case of social insurance system in a lot of Western European countries, also Taiwan and Korea and other places, it's there. But and you've got this interesting experience of having born a company in Singapore, moving it to the US, have a bunch of different health systems, you know, in the fragmented payment models, fragmented pieces and stakeholders, and I'm sure the other two entrepreneurs on the stage have this similar experience. How do you build that trust? How do you build that collaboration in order to permit the personalized medicine to actually take place across a bunch of stakeholders that don't necessarily have the same interests as you do or as the patient?
Yep. No, that's a good question. You know, we started the company in Singapore, and one thing, as I mentioned, there's only one, I would say, secret to a success of a digital health company or a healthcare company is evidence. You know, the only way you build trust is by demonstrating evidence, demonstrating clinical outcomes. So, you know, initially from day one, in fact, I'll give you an example. We went to the FDA 2 years ago, and we said, you know, we have a platform built for managing patients with heart failure, and that was our lead product. And the indication for use, essentially, we said, you know, this is a platform we want, and it's an app which can predict heart failure exacerbation at least 2 weeks in advance, and it can improve functional capacity and quality of life exactly like a drug would do. Can you approve this? So, you know, FDA looked at us, and they were like, nobody has even come to us and said, approve my product. You know, and we said, we have, here's all the data. And there was a discussion between FDA's CDER and CDRH, which is the drug and the device division, as to where does this application even fit in. because if you look at our claims of improving quality of life, functional capacity, that falls within the drug, but it's not a drug. It's not a compound. It's a software which falls under CEDAR. So when we went there, essentially we had 4 to 5 clinical trials, randomized studies with over 5,000 patients, which exactly demonstrated 2 things: clinical benefits, which essentially showed that patients who were not on our platform and patients who were on our platform had almost 68% reduction in healthcare utilization cost, which is hospitalization and mortality, and eventually improvement in functional capacity, quality of life. And the second outcomes which we demonstrated and showed them was essentially cost, because what matters to all the payers is the dollar saving. That's how we establish trust. And the second thing is, from day one, we established strong partnerships with some of the largest health systems in the US, including Mayo, Mass General, Brigham, et cetera, who worked with us, ran clinical trials for us, and were partners in this whole journey to really bring the product, which is completely revolutionary. And we have 3 FDA approvals today, leveraged by some of the payers, largest health systems, and even pharma, because for pharmaceuticals, they want to first of all identify ways to sell more, or I would say get drugs to the right patient at the right time. One of the problems today, let's just take heart failure. When we were trying to solve that problem, less than 1% of patients worldwide are on optimal dosage. Drugs exist, but today, if you look at heart failure stats, Asia, US, less than 1% on optimal dosage, and less than 20% of patients are on guideline-directed therapy. Guidelines exist since 20 years, but patients are not on optimal therapy. GP, the first part of the care is critical, but also when you start looking at the complex chronic condition patients, patients are not on optimal dosage. And really being able to, how do you use software to really optimize therapy, right dose to the right patient, and enabling clinicians, and not really removing them out of the loop, but really empowering them with the right amount of information to be able to manage these patients and, of course, optimize therapy. And I think we have seen staggering results worldwide, and heart failure is just one example. And when we talk about precision health, people talk about oncology, but it's not just oncology. Precision health ranges all the way from cardiovascular on how do you personalize therapies, the right dose to the right patient, all the way to COPD, respiratory disease, and of course oncology.
If I may ask, how do you ask anybody. I think one of the key issues is regulatory approvals.
Sure.
As you nicely laid out, this is a hugely conservative industry, and it's highly regulated, with the key concern not just because cost, because that's an insurance issue, or a private payment out-of-pocket issue, it's safety.
Yeah.
And the regulators are hugely conservative with approving anything new in healthcare because they want to make sure that it's safe to apply. So that is clearly an obstacle, which we all have to go through in the end of the day. But the biggest other question is, in precision medicine, there is a lot of potential business models, but how is it being monetized? The data, the new approaches. How can you actually make money from using all of these tools? And I think there will be a lot of new business models coming towards us. Insurance will probably be written in a completely different way in the future, based on a different set of data, a different set of assumptions, etc. David is probably going to make money by either working with the pharmaceutical industry and sell them your stuff so that they save money doing it, or you'll invest in your own drug development and you'll keep it proprietary, right? Yep. And you'll become the next Pfizer.
Pfizer wanted what, $300 billion? We'll make $300 billion.
Well, tell me a name you'd like better. I'll say that.
Integral.
Oh,
wow.
That's
founder confidence right there.
That's a circle argument.
But
anyway.
I think that's a very good point because the business model is critical. And with precision medicine, of course, eventually, at the end of the day, it's pharma, payers, providers, right? Those are essentially the customers. And the way we have approached really is tackling the payers and the pharma. For example, with pharma, all the way from building companion therapeutics and essentially, offering our platform as a service with every drug sold, and essentially having certain percentage of the drug sold. So as the drug scales, our platform scales, and patients are provided with better care and better outcomes because pharmas are battling under pressure because most of these drugs, which are expensive, are reimbursed based on outcomes. Yes. So essentially today, one of the most pioneer drug for, let's say, heart failure, Entresto, if you don't show reduction in hospitalization of around 20-25%, you don't get paid to the maximal amount. It's not that you sell more drugs, you get paid for it.
The problem with all of this is that if you think it through to the end, the players in the healthcare industry are actually asked to eliminate themselves and the need for their services by keeping people healthy until they pass. So that's the healthy longevity argument I made. I give you an example. We've seen as investors, we've been requested to invest in things like, okay, we have a patient cohort of 20,000 in a particular place. We've taken their cardiovascular health status, described by 20 different factors, and everybody has a score. Now, you go and you increase the cardiovascular health status of this population, and you are going to be paid based on the reduction of that score, assuming the lower the number, the better people's health. Now, because we live in the real world, and not in some fantasy, what happens is exactly this. So you go in, you take that contract. It's a 10-year contract. And your base is 17, let's say. So you come back a year later and you say, well, we've reduced it to 15. This is my payout. And they say, great. Well done. The next year you come and you say, well, it's now 12. And you get paid on that difference. Well, there's two things happen next. One is that's an asymptotic approximation of a number where you can get below. And the second is the baseline will shift on you because people say, well, the population is now much healthier, so why should we honor the 17 that we originally gave you? So we'll reduce that to 15. And that comes back to the business model. If you ask people to keep people healthy, you eliminate the provider's business, except for accidents, obviously, and stuff like that. But a lot of the non-communicable chronic diseases might be reduced to a point where it's not commercially viable anymore to work in a particular sector. Now, that may not be a bad thing, but if you look at the interests that people have, it's rather a tall order to ask me to eliminate myself and the need for my service. And that is the eternal problem that you have with precision medicine and keeping people healthy. Just want to say it and put it out there.
Well, maybe it's the problem with medicine in general as an end state. Actually, there's even two further complications with the scenario which Helmut has just described, which I completely agree with is one of the key challenges in making this all work. Is your way of measuring that heart score actually correct? And what happens if you get it wrong? And then the second, look at BMI, right? Bodybuilders with really, really high BMI. That's a super simplistic example, but there have been so many people with atypical body shapes who are perfectly healthy, that are basically getting penalized for the way they actually are, and that's normal for them.
But they tend to die younger.
Okay, that may be the anabolic steroids. That may be other factors involved in this. And then the second problem is you're assuming that the health systems are actually capable of executing this, which is another really big problem. So maybe we only have 6 minutes really left, so maybe instead of kind of asking what's wrong and maybe all these ethics, what makes you excited about the future? What's next? And then if we're very efficient, we can take a question from the audience. Anyone?
Anybody?
Yeah, just
okay.
shout it out. Yeah.
Well, I'm actually very excited by the multitude of opportunities that is coming towards us, and working in that space where you increase quality of life of real people, keep them healthier indeed, but also contribute to financeability questions in our economies, because healthcare has gotten to a point, I think, in every country where people are really looking at how to reduce cost in the healthcare system. And I do believe that this confluence of technologies that I've been talking about creates a lot more transparency for each of us in terms of our health status. I think we know a lot more today because we're becoming active consumers in a process of staying healthy. So I think we all spend a lot more time thinking about it, and that already is a great value. And so I think that the next 10 years, 20 years, we'll probably see a huge transformation, and that always creates investment opportunities, and we are investors. That's good news.
I think, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, please, Edwin, go ahead.
No, I think for us, I mean, it's the whole using technology to democratize quality healthcare. I think that is a main thing that what we're trying to do. Very textbook is that in our so-called vision statement. This is what we want to do. We want to have a dedicated family doctor for every family, and you get that from your mobile app. Everyone has an electronic health file, which builds the database, and everybody has a personalized health management plan, which goes back to Helmut's problem. Eventually, the health management plan will hopefully do away with a lot of the diseases that don't necessarily have to happen with proper health management. And I think this is what we're trying to build, at least in the Chinese context, at a very cost-wise, very feasible way.
Cool.
I think, just from my perspective, I think being in technology, one of the things which excites me is really realizing the dream of being able to predict and prevent disease, right? 3-4 years ago, we just started out as a dream, and today, we have been able to demonstrate in a variety of therapeutic areas that we indeed can really predict decompensation and predict disease, and enable clinicians with the right tools to intervene early, and of course payers with essentially better outcomes, and better outcomes even to the patient.
So I've never been more excited about the future of healthcare. We're in an environment where pharma is growing at a whopping negative 1.9% per year. Earnings per share is getting compressed rapidly. The vast majority of growth is occurring through mergers and acquisitions that are proving to be unsuccessful. This is an environment that is ripe for disruption. We have a system that is fundamentally broken. This is an entrepreneur's dream. There is a framework that if you can bring new tools and new opportunities, you can take this entirety industry, the entirety of even the therapeutics industry, which itself is about 2% of US GDP, and disrupt it in a single swoop. I think that is a foundational opportunity, and when you bring that to bear, the change will foment into how we think about insurance, how we think about patient engagement, how we think about regulatory approvals, because we have a structure in front of us that's about to change.
Cool. All right, I think we have time for one question really quickly. Who's got a burning question? All right, back there. Quick.
Hi, Mocanu from Wellington Management. Thanks for tackling such a complex topic. I think innovation is clearly the way forward. Question to anyone, do you see a future where we as patients would only pay for medicines or services that work? Meaning that we wouldn't pay for drugs that don't work. And how soon?
Yeah.
I think if you,
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, and I think if there are better tools where clinicians are aware of which drugs and which medication work for you as an individual, then you would just pay for that. So it's about gathering the right amount of data from you, which are more meaningful to you, and contextualizing that to you as an individual, which is essentially the right dose to the right patient at the right time. And I think this is already happening, and it will soon happen.
Yeah. Oh, one over there really quickly. 1 minute, that was efficient.
So data. Sorry, so about data, okay? So you said you can accurately, I'm not sure how accurate can you diagnose a patient, and how accurately can you actually predict a patient? So how do you collect the data? How do you assess through internet for blood tests, for swab tests? Could you kindly please share?
Sure. So when I say data, the kind of data what we essentially collect from patients is, let's take heart failure as an example. It's a 12 weeks program which we put patients on post-discharge, and patients go home with a sensor which is strapped on their arm. It's a non-invasive sensor, and a mobile application which they capture active, passive data. The data goes to the cloud. We collect over 16 different physiological parameters, nothing invasive, no bloods, nothing. It's purely based on sensors, physiology data. And we have trained our model on over 4 million patients' data, collected longitudinally in real time in an ambulatory setting.
Cool, thank you. We're out of time, but we still exist. So we don't vanish off the face of the earth the moment this panel finishes, and we'll all be around, hopefully. So thank you again, the esteemed panelists, for your time and insights today. And let's make this happen. Let's make personalized medicine for all a reality. And I think we can. It's within the means. And we need good investment to support this all.